Hello everyone and welcome to this week's tutorial on ProRPA.com. Today we'll be talking about one of those concepts which are very frequently asked in either if you're giving your Blue Prism certification exam or when you're giving any interview for a company. This is one of the core concepts of exception handling, right? And it is called exception bubbling. So I have given a literal definition of what bubbling means, like in generic layman terms, in my blog post. You can check that out, which is there in this description of the video. And I have drawn a type of an analogy to describe how it fits into the exception handling concept of the Blue Prism or programming languages in general, right? So what bubbling does is it simply is like handling of exception up the hierarchy, right? That's like the shortest definition you can probably give for bubbling. So what happens is, say, imagine you have one issue that's happening at the business object level, right? Then that issue will be escalated to the page which is calling that business object, and it will try to handle that exception over there. Now, what happens is, in case that exception is not handled at that page level, it goes back to one level up, which is the page which is referencing that page, right? I don't know if it makes complete sense or not, but to give an example, what happens is, I have a very simple program, right? This is the main page of the program. This is the Process Studio, right? So we have the main page, which is referencing to another page at the process level called the launch page, right? That's what it is doing. You can check that out. It's referencing to the page launch. Now, that means once we start executing, it goes to this stage, it goes to the launch page now. Now, launch page, what it's doing is it's calling an action of launch, which means a business object to launch some application. So if I view that object in the Object Studio, then here is the launching process, the launching business object. So I'm starting off, I'm launching the application and ending it. So what happens is, if you remember from the main page, we went to the launch page within the Process Studio. From that launch page, we are now referencing the business object, which is the launch object. I know the naming is pretty much the same, so it gets really confusing here. But now imagine this. When it starts running, when it ends, the process goes back to, or the compiler, whatever executes the program, right? The compiler goes back to the process level, which is the launch page level, because the next stage is end. So it then goes back to the main page level and then it continues with its execution. So you imagine if some error occurs here, where would it be handled? You don't know. We don't have any exception handling in here. So what are we going to do? This, first and foremost, whenever an exception occurs, it goes back to the page above it. The above it means the launch page in the Process Studio. So I go back to Process Studio and this is where the exception will be handled. Now, if it doesn't have any exception handling mechanism in here, then this page was referred by the main page. So the exception handling happens at this level. And finally, if this also doesn't have the exception handling mechanism, the recovery mechanism, then, well, we are pretty much screwed. Yeah, I mean, you're right. So that means the unhandled exception was now going to throw an exception error message, and the program sort of ends abruptly, and it is the failure stage, which is not what anybody would want. So right now, just to showcase how it works, I'm going to go to the main page. You see run, launch, it goes to the launch page, launch, and the business object is running and it ran, right? Close, go back. Now, I'm gonna mess up this program to some extent and see if that works or not. So if you see, I'm going to use the same exception handling at the main page and at the launch level. Now, if you imagine what I just did was, there could be a number of steps involved in here, but just to showcase how the execution works, I want to show you, let's say and I have to mess up the program as well. So I go back here, and instead of launching, I'm trying to terminate or attach, right? Well, there's no running instance of that application that I know of, so it's gonna automatically error out or something. So saving the changes and going back to my main page, if you see launch, it goes back to the launch page, launch, and now it recover, resume, and the program is again getting back and back into this, right? So if you see right now, the exception is handled at the launch page level because there was some error that happened at the, at the business object level, which means there was no instance to attach. That's why the program is running around here and here, and nothing is happening. Now, if I delete this, right, now what's going to happen is, you see, that's how the exception handling is happening. At the BO level, there was nothing to handle. So it went back to one process up, right? If this launch was if I had like number of pages in here, right, in the process studio, let's say launch 1, launch 2, launch 3, launch 4, launch 5. And launch 5 was the actually one which was calling the business object, right? And if something happens at the business object level, right, some exception, it will first try to be handled or attempted to be handled at the launch 5 level. Then if let's say launch 4 is referencing to launch 5, if it doesn't handle in the launch 5, it will handle to launch 4, blah, 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 so on, and all the way up to the main page, right? Depending on how we are referencing our pages and our business object, how we have maintained the hierarchy, how we have maintained the structure of our program, right? So if I run this main page now, you see I'm trying to launch here, launch, it goes back to the main page, and this is where the exception is being handled, right? Because I don't have a good recovery mechanism, so all it's doing is after resuming, it's still erroring out because I haven't attached it to an end stage. So it keeps on going back and forth here itself. That makes sense, right? This is what exception bubbling is all about. If you see, if I copy it back to the launch page and I link it to the end, you can imagine what's going to happen now, right? Let's go back to the main page. I would want you to guess what's going to happen, but it should be fairly straightforward, that it's not gonna enter into the infinite loop anymore, but rather after this, it's gonna come back to this and see, launch, start, launching, erroring out, resume, it's ended. And so the main page is also ended because that's the next stage after the launch. So launch has been handled in the launch page level, and now it's ending out here. If I would have had some other error in here, right, at this page level, if it was not an action or a page referencing stage, if there was some calculation that would have been messed up in here, then definitely it would have first worked at the local page level because this is the main page. So to sort of sum it up, the exception is first attempted to be handled at the local level, and then it goes to the parent level, right? You can draw another analogy. It's like I am like, let's say 35 years of old, right? Of age. And if I have any financial issue, I'm a working professional, I am sort of self-dependent. Now, if I have any problem, I would try to first tackle it myself, right? Some financial issue, some relationship issue, whatever the case may be. Now, if I'm having, if it becomes unhandled, if I cannot handle it myself, then I'll go to my dad or my mom, right? Seeking for help. So that's pretty much the same analogy. First, it will be handled locally at the page level. If not, then it goes to the parent page where it attempts to be handled. Now, if my dad also doesn't know, he might go to his dad, right? My grandfather, and so on, right? All the way up to the main page, up to the person who, you know, exists in the world who can help me out. So main page is like it's like the root level of this hierarchy. And then we have several branches which constitutes different pages, sub pages, and at the bottom level is what we have, the business objects. All right, I hope that makes sense. Please do remember, this is what exception bubbling is about. Very, very important topic. I cannot emphasize enough. It is something which is definitely going to be asked in some or the other way, especially in your certification exam, which I gave. I believe it's been a couple of months, like last year or so, probably an year or so. So what happens was they would give out some diagrams and say, where would this exception be handled, right? And you have to guess at which page level, at which object level. They have like huge practical oriented questions, which makes the exam tougher, but at the same time interesting as well. So I would highly ask you to go through the exception bubbling. If you have Blue Prism license, do try that out with different, pages. The example that I was just giving you with launch 1, launch 2, launch 3, all the way to some XYZ numbers, and then try to call a business object, try to create an exception out there and see how it is handled, and so on. All right, this is it for this week, guys. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to info@prorpa.com. You can also check out my video tutorials available on Udemy. It is back online. I know it was made private for some time due to some constraints we had, but now I think everything is sorted, so feel free to do that. We'll again upload our courses back on Skillshare as well, but for the time being, Udemy is a pretty good resource, pretty reliable. For Amazon books, you can check out the CRISPR learning for Blue Prism. If you want to try out the UiPath as well, feel free to do so. I have ServiceNow books as well. If you want to learn on the IT service management tools, feel free to check those out as well. And subscribe to the YouTube channel, to the blog, and happy automating. Thank you very much. Goodbye.